All right. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cosmic Connection. This is the place where we explore the beauty and the order of the cosmos and your connection to it all. My name is Amanda Walsh. I'm the founder of Astrology Hub. I am so thrilled to be here with your favorite celestial navigator, Rick Merlin Levine. And it is so nice to be here with you all. Thank you so much for being here. It feels like it's been forever.
It has been forever.
I mean, have we lived like 10 lifetimes since last month?
We've lived a while. I'm trying to move my microphone out of the direct line so I'm not in the shadow there. I think
Okay.
that's better.
Nice.
Yeah, it's been forever. It's been forever, and it's only been a month. But
Yes.
This last month has been quite a month.
It's been quite a month.
Okay, this microphone has a life of its own right now. I don't want to. Okay, I can talk while I'm dealing with this.
Okay. All right. So Rick, I remember, I think that you were talking about Christmas Eve, December 23rd, for at least all of 2021. And I do believe you started talking about it in 2020.
I did.
And I literally cannot tell you how many times I heard your voice in my head over that holiday time. It's like, Rick told us about Christmas Eve. He told us this is a big moment. And I don't know about all of you, but it's been pretty eventful.
It's been, for me, it has been less personally eventful than it's been eventful as you look in the outer world and just see how the events of the beginning of the year have reached a heightened polarization. And now the question is, where do we go with this in 2022?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's interesting because, as I've been saying, and many other astrologers have been saying, that the three Saturn-Pluto squares, that would be mid-February.
You mean Saturn Uranus?
Saturn, I don't know what I just said, but Saturn Uranus, yes.
Yes, you said Pluto.
The three Saturn Uranus squares, starting in mid-February, mid-June, and Christmas Eve, are really the delimiters of 2021, which is a year that is coming after an extraordinary year, 2020, which we really don't need to recall in detail now, but that itself coming at the end of an extraordinary period of time of 2012 to 2020, really, of the Uranus-Pluto squares that saw, going way back, that saw the the rise of the Arab Spring, and even feeding into it Ferguson, Missouri, and the racial unrest and the demonstration in the streets, and the political craziness of the 2010s and so on. And really, Saturn, it's interesting, but most of us think of 2020 was when Saturn joined up with, or when we had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That was in that was in January of 2020, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And then later in April and throughout the rest of the year, we had Jupiter come in and conjoin both Pluto and Saturn. And then we culminated the year with the with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. But here's the thing that we don't often think about, is that when we have a pattern like Saturn, I got too many planets going around in my head. When we have a pattern like Uranus squaring Pluto, that was exact 7 times between 2012 and 2015. When we have a pattern like that, and we have a faster moving planet come sweeping through it, it was at the tail end of that Saturn conjoined Pluto and then squared Uranus. And so even though we think of the Saturn conjoining Pluto in January of 2020 as one event, and we think of the 3 Saturn square Uranuses in 2021 as one event, it's really Saturn bringing in the finality and the stability, following up this crazy decade of Uranus squaring Pluto, with Saturn sweeping through that square, those points, and first hitting Pluto and then hitting Uranus. And so even though we would like to be done with it, and in one way, I think we're through an eye of a needle. I think that the conceptual battle lines have been drawn. I think that the positions are known. There certainly can be new quirks and things that come into this from different directions, but I feel like now it's mostly a what are we going to do with all this that we've now experienced, and how are we going to make this work in 2022, knowing that although the Saturn square Uranus is over and done, it will never be exact again. Well, until Saturn squares Uranus and opposes Pluto, in 8 or 9 years. But until then, it's done, except it's not quite done, because as we've talked about before, when Saturn retrogrades, by the end of April, Saturn and Uranus are 5 degrees away from being exactly square. I mean, that's huge, from 0 to 5 in just a month. And yet they're 5 degrees of orb, and yet we're still going to be feeling it, because as faster moving planets move through those degrees, they will still conjunct or square or oppose first Uranus and then Saturn. And I think really this is the big deal in not only 2022, but in January of 2022, is we get the first aspects of planets, even just the moon, that make an aspect to those two, to that pair, to Saturn and Uranus. Whereas all through 2021, every time a planet made an aspect to Saturn and Uranus, it aspected Saturn first, because it was at a lower degree, and then Uranus. So we had the restraint, the event, the reality, the structure, and then we broke through it, Uranus. Mm-hmm. Starting now, starting this week, starting as the moon, even with the new moon yesterday or the day before, depending on where you are. But today on January 4th, we have the moon moving through Aquarius that squared Uranus, and then a few hours later, it conjoined Saturn. And once again, now this is same planets involved, but the energy is first we bust through, first we get forward thinking, first we look at the potential and the possibility, and then Saturn, we pull it back to make it real. And so I think that the effect is going to be very, very different, and it'll be interesting as the faster moving planets right now, first the moon, but beginning in the days and weeks ahead, we'll have Mercury and Venus as it turns direct, and then the sun moving through Aquarius, and then as they move through Taurus, through each of the fixed signs, they will repeat these patterns until the autumn, when retrograde Saturn has backed up so much it's within 1/2 of a degree of squaring Uranus again. And so I think that we still have some fallout from all of this to deal with.
So I have a feeling what you just said will be one of those things that is ringing in all of our ears come
on
fall.
On election day of 2022.
Yes, and you've said, I never look at astrology and say that's bad astrology. Like that, you don't do that generally. And yet you said that the astrology on election day is bad astrology. It's not good astrology.
It's an eclipse day with Mars retrograde, with the Saturn Uranus back and close, and there's other things. It's just a lot going on. And what does that mean? How will it play out? I don't know, but it's certainly statistically strange. Okay. So we will see. We'll revisit that again and again. But right now we're on the fact that it's a new year. We're through this square, and at least right now it feels like we're moving away from it. It feels like because the orb between Saturn and Uranus right now is growing day by day by day. It feels like we're done with this. It feels like we're moving into new territory, and yet we certainly have planets lingering in Capricorn that are reminding us of what's going on. It's really weird because I know I'm saying what's that, speaking out of two corners or two sides of the mouth, because on one hand I'm saying it's over, but on the other hand I'm saying we're carrying a lot of baggage with us, and it really ultimately, if we want to look at the bigger picture, the wider perspective, it's really not going to be until Pluto leaves Capricorn for the final time. Pluto squeaks into Aquarius in 2023, back into Capricorn, and it's not until November of 2024, which is 2.5 years or so away, almost 3 years away, I guess. That when Pluto leaves Capricorn for the last time in November of 2024, until then, we're going to still be looking at Pluto's unfinished business. And what is Pluto's unfinished business? It's deconstructing or taking apart everything which needs reconstruction or put together correctly. And when we look at January in light of that, there on the surface, at first, it doesn't seem to be a lot of movement. And that's interesting. And the reason is we have two inner planets that are changing directions. We have Venus, which has been retrograde, will be going direct at the very end of the month. It'll be retrograde for the pretty much the entire month of January. It goes direct, I think, on the 29th, I'm pretty sure. And on top of that, Mercury is already, although it's an Aquarius, which is futuristic and conceptual, it's already slowing down because Mercury does its retrograde dance, and Mercury turns retrograde on January 14th. It doesn't turn retrograde until February 3rd. But here's what this means. This means that the two fastest moving planets normally, Mercury and Venus, are making very few aspects because they're moving slower, or they're going backwards and repeating aspects that have already been made. They're visiting old territory. And I think one of the important things to think about, which I know we talked about last month, is the fact that Venus made two conjunctions with Pluto. Venus direct through Capricorn, lined up with Pluto a couple of weeks ago, and then it turned retrograde. And right around Christmas Day, Venus made its second, it was on Christmas Day itself, Venus conjoined Pluto for the second time. Now, Venus pulls way back. It turns direct, as I mentioned earlier, on January 29th. But it takes all of February for Venus to, once it's moving direct, to catch back up to Pluto at 26, 27, almost 28 degrees of Capricorn by then. So Venus will line up with Pluto for a third and final time the end of February, really March 3rd, but we'll be feeling it by the end of February. Now, why this is significant is that when we look at Mercury also is going to, has already joined up with Mercury has already joined up with Pluto, in fact, around Christmas Day while Venus was in the mix. But Mercury will actually retrograde, and it will go back over that point, and it will then go direct not until later on. But we have this feeling that we're not done with the Capricorn energy. And when it's Venus and Mercury both aligning with Pluto, in fact, the Sun will also align with Pluto this month. And this is all about bringing things out into the open that were hidden. By the way, Mercury's retrograde alignment with Pluto is on January 28th. So this is a repeat in some ways of that energy of toward the end of December when the Saturn Pluto, I keep saying Saturn Pluto, when the Saturn Uranus square was exact. But we're getting this deepening and uncovering more and more and more of things that already are in the past. But whether it's pandemic related, vaccine related, whether it's insurrection related, whether it's other government cover up related, who knows what. I think that this is largely where we're going to see that.
Rick, you're saying that the things the patterns that have come up at the end of December, that we're going to be revisiting those again, is basically what I'm hearing.
Yes, yet it will be without the exactitude of the Saturn Uranus square, which means I think that we'll be able to ingest it easier. We'll be able to assimilate it. We'll be able to work with it. I think part of the problem of the Saturn square Uranus is that it's so intense that it makes it difficult for us to engage with the energy. I mean, we're not through the transition. I mean, for many reasons. I mean, as we go through January and we look at the lunations, and here's an interesting thing. I think you will have heard it first here. All right, so we know that when there are 2 full moons in a month, or some people say 3 full moons in a season. I mean, there's different versions of the definition of a blue moon. But normally there's 1 new moon and 1 full moon each month, right?
Right.
All right. So January opens and closes with a new moon. There's a new moon on January 2nd. That's the Capricorn new moon. And then there is the innovative Aquarius new moon on January 31st. This is interesting because the larger sweep that we're going through is a sweep from Capricorn into Aquarius that began with Jupiter, now off into Pisces, but moved through Aquarius. Then with Saturn, now moved into Aquarius and will be there for another year and a half or so. And eventually with Pluto moving into Aquarius, this is the larger sweep of energy from the holding back the structure, from the status quo to the conservative to the what I call infantile regression, the make America great again, going back to the past because we think that was better than what it is in the future. And yet the movement of the planets into Aquarius on a large scale is really about the cultural sweep that we are taking. And yet every year in January, even late December, January, February, the sun and Mercury and Venus and sometimes Mars make that same sweep from Capricorn into Aquarius. And so we've already had Mercury move into Aquarius. It'll retrograde back into Capricorn. We will have Venus moving direct into Aquarius, and the sun moves into Aquarius in January. But here's the crazy thing. The moon, the new moon on January 2nd is a Capricorn new moon. Plant your seeds in the area of stability, structure, stasis, staticness. Is that such a word? Staticness, whatever. However, by January 31st, there's the Aquarius new moon, which signals the unforeseen breakthroughs that are bringing us closer to these imagined futures. And yet it's already set up. So the month of January is kind of like a microcosm of this bigger thing. But here's what I said you'll hear first that I think that is kind of weird. I've never seen it before. I should preface this by saying I think over the next month or so, astrologers will come out of the woodwork and this will become a big deal thing and people will say how important it is. And I just want to go on the record saying it's unimportant, although it's incredibly curious. And what I'm talking about is that January has 2 new moons, and so does March. Impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, impossible. It made me do a double take when I realized it. But the only month that is short enough to not guarantee that there are two lunations. Remember, lunations occur, 14 days apart, a little bit over 14 days apart, which means there's always a new moon and full moon in every month. However, February is only 28 days long, which means if you have the new moon on January 31st, that actually in some places on the planet will occur on February 1st. But it's right at that hairline that for you in Hawaii, for me on the west coast of the United States, we get that new moon on the night of January 31st. In fact, the new moon on January 31st is at 9:46 p.m. here in Seattle, which actually means that it's at 12:46 a.m. the following day on February 1st in New York. However, for you and me, we have two new moons in January, and then there's the full moon mid-February. And theoretically, what should be February's new moon occurs the 1st of March. Which means that March has a second new moon in it.
Right. Okay, so it's highly unusual, but it doesn't really mean anything astrologically because the calendar itself isn't really aligned astrologically.
Right? That's right. I call it a calendrical, curiosity.
Right.
Like a blue moon. A blue moon really it has no astrological meaning or value. It just depends on where the date is cut off. Right. Anyhow, it is an interesting thing though, and what it does mean though is that the month of January 2022 has that first new moon in the retrogressive stability seeking sign of Capricorn. And then the second new moon is basically kind of pushing us forward. But even still, we're not going to be done with this until we learn our lessons. It's Saturn. Saturn's the cosmic naysayer that says no until you get it right, and then the door opens, the obstacle disappears.
Okay, so
go ahead.
Go ahead. No. Go ahead.
I was going to say, while we're on the lunations, the Cancer full moon on January 17th, it's a Cancer full moon, and it's very closely opposed to Pluto, again, revealing all these things that are not apparent. The sun, as it conjoins Pluto, this is the Cancer full moon opposes Pluto, which means that the sun, actually on January 16th, the day before the full moon, the sun aligns with Pluto. And remember, Pluto is the hidden. Pluto is the underworld. Pluto is the unconscious. Pluto is everything we don't know. It's everything underground. It's everything that's not apparent. And when the sun once a year catches up with Pluto, it holds this nuclear powered candle into the darkest of caves so we can see what's going on. And Jung would tell us, Carl Jung would tell us that the way we deal with the power that the unseen and the unknown has over us, and we don't even know it has that power over us, the way we deal with it is we make the unseen seeable, we make the unknown knowable, and in that process we can actually work with the energy to assimilate it and incorporate it and to dance with our demons rather than resisting them, because in resisting them, we actually give them more power because they have to become more powerful to meet our resistance.
Okay, so it sounds like we're having a lot of this opportunity to really get beneath what's happening, to see what's under there so that we can learn our lessons, we can actually move on with some resolution from some of these things that are up. Yeah. So I know that last month or December, the theme was the end is near. So what would you say is the theme of this? Like, how do we encapsulate this January energy?
Oh, I think it's the beginning is here. You know,
But
it's bring on the new, even though that's why I said at the very beginning, I know I'm talking out of two corners of my mouth at the same time, but
Mhm.
the theme really is bring on the new.
Mm.
Except we don't get to just bring it on in an isolated context. We still have to deal with the ramifications of what it is that has already gone on.
Right.
You know,
Okay.
there is
Oh,
one other shift here though that we should mention. I saw a lot of astrologers actually mention this last month, um, but but it's an interesting thing, and that is that the lunar nodes, the north node, south node of the moon, which moves retrograde, except it wobbles. So if you're really tracking the nodes, they go retrograde and direct and retrograde direct and retrograde direct every few days. And because of that, because there wasn't the ephemerises that we have with the or the ability to put in the data in a chart and see exactly where the node is, most astrologers have grown accustomed to using what we call the mean node. Now, this isn't the mean node like mean people suck or anything like that. It's mean as an average. And so the mean node is forgetting about this rapid wobble. I say rapid every few days or so, forgetting about this and just making it into a smooth trajectory, which is not how it moves, but that's the mean node. And the mean node actually moved from Gemini, from Gemini Sagittarius, where it's been for the last year and a half, and because the predominant motion of the lunar nodes is retrograde, that people noted that the lunar nodes moved from Gemini Sagittarius into Taurus Scorpio last month. That was the mean node. The actual node, the true node, moves into or retrogrades back into Taurus and Scorpio actually on January 17th, January 18th, right in there, which is the day that we talked about earlier. That's the day of the full moon. And so I think that that's significant, that's important. And I think that on a larger scheme of things, the fact that the moon's nodes for the last year and a half have been in an informational axis, Gemini connecting dots, trying to find out, what connects with what, how to put pieces of information together, and then Sagittarius, what is the truth? How do I take that and bring it into something greater? And we're moving into a period where I think that we're going to be more practical, more feet on the ground, and what does this mean for me, and how does this work in my life in a practical scenario, as the North Node backs into Taurus mid-January. And that's perhaps a little bit more subtle, but we will watch that and see as the year unfolds what happens there.
okay. So you mentioned a few things I'd love to ask some questions about. The first thing that you mentioned is that in the past year, we were doing Saturn, Uranus. Like when we were having aspects, it would be Saturn first, then Uranus. And so
because Saturn was at a lower degree.
Right. So there'd be some sort of restriction, but then an opening, or like some right? That's how that felt a little bit. Like here's a restriction, yes, and then here's the opening from that restriction.
Yes.
Now we're going the opposite. So we're having Uranus and then Saturn. And as aspects happen, it'll go Uranus, Saturn. So
correct.
Is that going to feel like opening and then restriction? Or what are the different ways that could that energy?
Well, we're going to have to revisit this over the next several months, because the truth of the matter is, I know how the archetypes and the symbolism works. I don't know how it'll work in practicality, and I think it'll change through the year somewhat. But here's the two extreme ways that it can work. In one way is we do something crazy that is brilliant, innovative, radical. We take a risk. We just go for it. And that's the Uranus side. And then a couple of hours or a couple of days later, we're in jail.
Mm.
you know,
Oh, great.
because
Wow.
Saturn comes in.
Whoa.
In other words, in one way, we have the risk taking or the innovation followed by the arm of the status quo coming in and suppressing it. That's
Right.
one extreme. The other extreme is that Uranus allows for the breakthrough, and then Saturn comes in and stabilizes it.
Okay.
And I think it depends. I've looked at this through the year a bit, and I think it depends on what aspects are being made to Uranus and or to Saturn. In other words, if Uranus is getting a lot of squares and half squares and so on at one point in time, while Saturn is getting some smooth trines, it may be that Saturn's there just to stabilize the Uranian energy so that it lasts. So it's not just a lightning strike and then the lightning is over. You know, we can look at events in 2010 and say how there were moments that much of the country or much of the world that felt or was suppressed, like lightning, exploded into awareness. And now, is it gone? What happened to it? Well, it's still there, but how do we turn that into something that's more Saturnian and stabilized? That becomes the question on that side of the spectrum. On the other side of the spectrum, of course, it's how do we eradicate that energy completely as to make it as if it never happened. I don't know which way it'll flow, but it's definitely different than the way it did last year. But you know, you can look at this going back a year ago to January 6th during the insurrection, regardless of what your political stance is, irrelevant to me right now. The fact is that there were people who invaded the Capitol space and there was violence. That's enough for what I'm saying right here. That happened while Jupiter had just gone over Saturn and Jupiter was squaring Uranus. And so that Jupiter basically squaring Uranus was this moment of expression that it was like, whoops, too much. Whoops, too far. Jupiter, big idea, grand thinking, Uranus, electricity, lightning, kapow. That was Uranus square. That was Jupiter squaring Uranus. Well, then a month later, when Saturn came into making its first square to Uranus, moving slower than Jupiter, but being at the same spot that Jupiter was during the January 6th insurrection, by mid-February was when we had the active impeachment. And again, I'm not here to politicize. I'm only here to connect the specific events with the specific astrological events. And so we'll see what happens. You know, as Jupiter moves on in Pisces, Jupiter is going to make a sextile with Uranus in Taurus. That won't be till later in the year. I can tell you real quickly when that will be. Jupiter reaches that sextile. We're looking at mid-February. So will this be a kind of push again that maybe is more cooperative sextile, more opportunistic than the Jupiter square Uranus when Jupiter sextiles Uranus in mid-February? Again, we'll have to wait and see, but that's the astrological thinking.
Okay, another question for you. You said that Venus and Mercury aren't going to be making a lot of aspects this month
because they're moving so slowly, because
right.
In order to turn direct or retrograde, they have to stop.
Okay, so how do you interpret that? Like what how are we going to feel that energy or lack of energy, I guess?
Yeah, we might feel it as a
yeah,
just because there's less noise. You know, often the Mercury, Venus, and even Mars, but Mars is moving at a good clip right now. So, but the fact that Venus and Mercury are both moving slower just means that I think that there's just a little bit less distraction from the reaction to everything hour by hour, day by day, week by week. and that the aspects that that Venus and Mercury do make during this time are actually more important than usual because of the fact that they are moving slower.
So, Rick, you're saying that the theme is bring on the new, except for that we're still definitely dealing with a lot of the things we've been dealing with. It's not like,
yeah, it's bring on the new, but not too quickly. No, I mean,
bring on the new. Okay, bring on the new, but not too quickly. So, what will be bringing in new energy for us? Like, where are we going to be feeling that? Is that just because Saturn and Uranus are starting to really separate from each other?
No, ask that again. I'm not sure I understood that question.
What part of the astrology is going to be bringing in new? And when you say new, are we looking at new storylines completely? Are we looking at new faces of the same things? Oh,
I don't think we're looking at new storylines completely. I think what we're doing is we're looking at the fact that the territory around us has in fact changed and that we are in new territory. We still have some of the old storylines that are either holding us back or are plaguing us or are motivating us to follow through with what needs to be followed through. I think all of that is true. But I think that what's new is the feeling of moving conceptually from Capricorn to Aquarius. Remember, Saturn is in Aquarius. We're moving into Aquarius, but Saturn in Aquarius is saying, we're in the future, man. This is the future. Let's make it real, but I'm going to hold you back every step of the way to make sure that as we move into the future, we don't just go there helter-skelter crazy fast. Meanwhile, Uranus and Taurus, which is, now, leading the show, in a way, wants to go there faster, but it's also in Taurus. I don't think that there's going to be any crazy, one lightning strike resolution to all of the stuff that we've been dealing with. But I think that the integration, assimilation, the awareness, the processing, all of this is going to take time, and it's almost like 2022 is, and really even into 2023 until Pluto peaks into Aquarius. I think we're the cosmos is giving us the time to hopefully not get lazy and go back to sleep. I think of a Rumi poem that I can't reproduce the whole thing, but it's, the morning has arrived, I'm awake, do not go back to sleep. The birds are chirping, the sun is up, do not go back to sleep. And it's obviously not a metaphor about waking up in the morning. It's a metaphor about waking up.
Rick, we never had a chance to talk about this, and I'm really curious. What are you saying is the theme for 2022? I always love your themes for the year. Like, they always ring so true, and then I think of them all year. What do you have a theme for 2022?
Maybe. I mean, there is that whole thing that says not so fast. It's because that plays with us throughout the entire year. The idea that we've really moved through something, we've processed something, and yet, what I think of? I think of in Exodus. I know I'm not getting all religious here on you, but in Exodus, after the Jews are either let go or escape from their slavery in Egypt, depending on how you want to tell that story, they're moving into the promised land. And they can't enter the promised land until the last person who was in slavery dies off, which turns out to be Moses. When Moses dies, then they get to enter the promised land. And so there's something here about this whole process of things take time to die off properly before we can actually fully embrace them and fully move forward. And I would say that we're so, what's the word I'm looking for? Myopic, narrow focused, narrow visioned, nearsighted, I think is what sometimes that I think that we forget that we're really still working on the conjunction of Uranus and Pluto in the mid 60s, which is like a new moon. Remember, a new moon is when any two planets line up, and that new moon holds the energy for an entire cycle. Well, the new moon, if you will, this would really be a new Uranus to Pluto. When Uranus and Pluto were lined up in the summer of 65 and 66, that set in motion a cycle of freedom, innovation, Uranus, Pluto, depth of expression, that won't complete for another 100 years or so.
Oh, wow.
Except its opening square, the 90-degree angle, which Dane Rudhyar called the aspect of conflict in awareness. In other words, every month we have a new moon, and we make our, plant our seeds of intention. We make our resolutions for the month. And then at the first quarter moon, when the moon is 90 degrees to the sun, we typically go through a crisis that says, what's important enough for me to hold on to, and what that occurred at the new moon am I going to let go of? And then it comes around to the opposition, fulfillment, culmination, and then the third quarter moon, which Dane Rudhyar said was a crisis in consciousness. What's not going to make the cycle all the way through? What do I need to let go of? What am I holding on so that it makes the next cycle? Well, what happened in the 1960s around the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, and then at the opening square, the conflict of awareness, of action, conflict in action, was the 2010 to 2020, roughly. Exactly 2012 to 2015, 7 times, but 2010 to 2020, even 2021. We're still in the midst of that. And so this is the extraordinariness of 2020 and 2021, is that it has such astrological weight from so many different perspectives that are all part of the conflict in action, conflict in awareness, as the remembrance of what happened in the 60s kind of come into conflict, and what's going to survive or what's not going to survive. I think it's still too soon to say.
Rick, is this some of the things that are covered in Changing of the Gods with Rick Tarnas?
Yes, and you're speaking, I know, of a 10-part documentary that was produced by Kenny Osable, who was the founder of Bioneers, based upon the work of Rick Tarnas, who I'm very happy and proud to call an associate and a friend. And Rick Tarnas, who wrote a book called Cosmos and Psyche that I have a couple of copies of back there on my bookshelves, is a book about the slower moving planets and their relationship to the unfolding history of humanity, but not just an individual in humanity, to invention, to political dominance, to empires, to inventions, to breakthroughs in thought, all these things tied to that. And yes, the Changing of the Gods will specifically 10 nearly hour-long episodes deal with the focus of what happened at the conjunction in the mid 60s, and how that relates not only to what's going on now, but how it relates to each of the squares, oppositions, and conjunctions going back several hundred years. And it's a phenomenal work. It's a phenomenal work. And it will be released. It will be released on February 22nd. And I'm sure that you'll have more to say to that about that as we get closer to it.
Oh, definitely. And we're going to have Rick on the Astrology Hub podcast. Rick Tarnas will be on January 21st. So I'll be doing an interview with him about the show. And then our Inner Circle members are going to get it to have a screening of Changing of the Gods, the first episode in the series, and a panel where they get to ask Rick Tarnas, Becca Tarnas, his daughter, and Kenny questions at the end of. Anyways, it's going to be really, I think it's a great movie for astrology. I think it's
Oh,
going to bring
well,
tons of awareness to astrology as a credible study of cycles of time. And
yes, but I think more important than that, or maybe as important, is it'll be a great movie for increasing the awareness of people, whether or not they ever pursue astrology.
oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's just going to be hard to deny that astrology that the movement of the planets is impacting life on Earth, and we can show it, we can chart it throughout history.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited for that. Okay, so Rick, in summary, I mean, is there anything else specifically you want to talk about for January?
Um,
We talked about new moons. We talked about Pluto and the sun. We talked about Mercury and Venus. Anything else that you want to point out?
we could drill down on individual dates. I think I mentioned the Mercury retrograde on January 14th
Yeah.
and Mercury direct on February 3rd. Um, we the Venus direct on January 29th. I'm just looking here to see if there's other major things that I've left out. I mean, the fact is that there are, January 18th, Mars makes a square and a half with Uranus. And the reason why that's interesting is because it then makes a half square with Saturn on the 23rd. So this is a slower moving planet, kind of exacerbating the now waning Saturn Uranus square. Mars hits the Uranus agitation point on January 18th, explosive, expressive, innovative, unexpected. And then on the 23rd, Mars makes the half square to Saturn that really, kind of holds things back and makes it real. And then, interestingly enough, and this is something we didn't mention, and that is Mars then moves from Sagittarius, where it's been, into Capricorn on the following day, on January 24th. So I imagine this period of the 18th through the 24th, 25th, we may see some things become real and more stabilized. And what does that mean in our lives personally or culturally? I don't know, but I'm sure we'll be able to fill in our individual stories. So yeah, I mean but that's part of why you have the weekly, the lunation discussions, and that whole process is to drill down deeper on the specific, things of that day, that week. I try to take a more global look and put the whole thing together. So
it's perfect. Yeah. Yes. And by the way, that the weekly weather is coming back on Monday. We're going to be rotating astrologers. We're kicking it off with Christopher Renstrom next Monday. I'm sure hopefully you'll get to do a week with us. We'd love to have you do a week with
anytime.
us. Yeah. Okay. So another question for you. What's the flavor of this Mercury retrograde?
I think it's Pluto. I think both the Venus and, the flavor of the Venus and Mercury retrogrades they're both teasers. Mercury even more so because it makes it into Aquarius. Venus almost made it into Aquarius. And now we're having to go back and do the retrograde Mercury over Pluto again, the Venus direct over Pluto again, and then the Mercury direct. And so I really think that that Pluto is kind of like a silent, deep, I don't want to say hero, but player throughout the month and into March. And I think both the Mercury and Venus retrogrades have to do with going back into the structure, into the Capricorn realm, into the realm of stability, in order to make things right. It's maybe rebuilding the foundation before we put on new floors on the building.
Rick, how do we? This is. I'm going to word this question in a way that. How do we make friends with Pluto? How do we? When Pluto's approaching and we hear, oh, it's a Pluto month and it's a Pluto Mercury retrograde and it's a Pluto all that. I mean, I don't know about all of you, but it's kind of like, ooh. I mean, okay. How do we make friends with this Pluto energy? Like, what would you say to a client who has a huge Pluto transit coming, or you know?
Good question. And I'm a difficult person to answer that question because I've never had to make friends with Pluto. He's always been my best friend in the zodiac, in the planetary pantheon. Now,
Right,
for
but
the
what do you love about him?
well, first, for those who know a bit about charts, as you may know, I have a pile up of planets in Aries, a close conjunction between Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the Sun, all in mid Aries. And I have mid Gemini rising, and I have Pluto at mid Leo. What that means is Pluto in my chart is trine my Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and sextile my ascendant. So Pluto in my chart doesn't have hard aspects.
Ah, I see.
And so I've never worked really hard at making Pluto my friend,
Mm.
although I've always been attracted to the depth, to the intensity, to the transformations. Scorpios in general, my dad, my daughter, several of the closest relationships I've had have had either very strong Pluto conjunctions with the sun or moon, or Scorpios themselves. So I'm a bad person to ask because I think Pluto is magnificent. I think Pluto is the power of transformation. And I think that where we get into trouble with Pluto is the fear that the ego has for maintaining the status quo.
Mm.
You see, because Pluto doesn't give a shit about the ego's preference for
Right.
maintaining the status quo. I sometimes think that when we have Pluto transits, we're all like caterpillars becoming butterflies. However, if the caterpillar had an ego like we do, there's no way in hell, and the double entendre here is intended. There's no way in hell it would ever get into the cocoon, because the cocoon is the caterpillar's hell realm.
Mm.
I mean, its eyes melt, its skin deteriorates, it
Oh.
begins to deconstruct until there's nothing left except this black brown sludge of something that's no longer caterpillar and definitely no sign of butterfly. And yet it is the trust in the evolutionary process that allows every caterpillar to become a butterfly. And so we as humans with these inflated egos, basically when we see or hear an outer planet coming, and that would be, and I would even include Saturn here, but Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, of course, as the ultimate, maybe even Eris as the ultimate, Pluto going out further, because the slower moving the planet, the more finality, the more intense the energy is, because the planet moves slower. And it doesn't matter what, I mean, there are ways to, I wouldn't say cheat Saturn, but there are things. I mean, I've seen situations where people crammed for a Saturn exam and they passed because they crammed and they meant it. And they maybe didn't pass with the flying colors that they would have if they had been studying for 14 years. But the last year of living healthier or of doing the right things or making right was enough to get them through this particular aspect. Pluto, on the other hand, you don't negotiate with Pluto. Pluto, the more you negotiate or the more you resist, the stronger Pluto, has to be. Pluto's like Roto-Rooter. It's going to clear out the shit. It doesn't matter how bad or ugly or clogged or whatever it is. It's going to bring it out. And so from that standpoint, I think the way we become less fearful of Pluto is that we become more aware of our own process, of our own stuff. The more work we do, and I'm saying this, I mean, there's many different schools of how to get here, but in the depth psychology and the psychoanalytic individual psychology, Jungian, character psychology, Gestalt, in any of these processes where we're doing the shadow work. And I was interested to find out recently um, that the word shadow work was not a word that Jung used, but it was more recently coined in a book about Jungian work. Um, and um, uh, and so the point is here that the more shadow work we do, the more work we do with making the unknown known, the more work we do in the Joseph Campbell mythology of the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell, who wrote "The cave we fear the most is the one that has our greatest treasures." That's a Pluto statement.
Mm-hmm.
The more we can do to bring the unseen out into the open is, and I talked about this before, when the sun makes its yearly conjunction with Pluto, that we get a chance to see things that at other times are not necessarily visible, and that sun conjunct Pluto is on January 15, 16, right in there. And instead of, the more in denial we are, the more cordoned off we are from our own hidden impulses, from our own fears, from our own stuff. I mean, it's not like we have to fix everything, but we have to be aware of everything. Because if we're aware of it, then Pluto is simply a process that transforms that into something else. It's been said that the caterpillar is the butterfly's way of making a new butterfly. So, in a way, our meager existence as humans, we're caterpillars, you know? And it's kind of going back to an alchemical concept that we can alchemically change lead, gross base substance, into pure gold, pure consciousness. And so I look at Pluto as sometimes being really difficult, by what it actually pushes us through, or what happens when the shit in our pipes is actually roto-rooted and begins to move. It's not always pleasant, but it's nature. And the natural process brings about evolution. The more we fight it, the more difficult it is.
Yeah, I love thinking too about the heart on Pluto. And so, the actual ice shape of the heart, because it's like, yes, there's depth, and yes, it can be challenging. And yes, I mean, the time when basically my whole entire life blew up, it was Pluto square my nodes. And that it was like years of just devastation, is what it felt like. But in that process, there was so much love. I mean, even as things were falling apart, there was more and more love and more opportunity to know myself on a deeper level. And I think that, that's where that transformation process is actually, it can be a very beneficial thing for us to go through, even though it can be really
and interestingly enough, everyone's different, but I have a harder problem. Well, I have throughout most of my life have had harder problems with Saturn transits than with Pluto transits. And again, in my chart, Saturn has hard aspects all the way around. It doesn't have a whole lot of easy connections, whereas Pluto has the easier connections. Liz Green wrote in her book on Saturn, A New Look at the Old Devil, A New Look at an Old Devil. Liz Green wrote that that Pluto is Saturn's only friend.
Yeah, I love that. And people are writing in some really great things too. Cindy says, not pleasant, but worth it relative to soul growth. You have to embrace surrender to love Pluto. There's a few things in here that are just nice. The Phoenix as rebirth.
Well, and that's it. And the Phoenix can't be reborn unless it goes through the destruction from fire and ashes. There's the ruins of destruction is what, from fire, is what hardens the shell of the egg so that the Phoenix can break out of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that
Leela
doesn't
says,
take away, it doesn't take away from how difficult the Pluto transit can be, by the way. And
right.
different people get dished out different amounts at different times in their lives. There are people who are born into plutonic situations that die in those situations. There are people who relentlessly face them and turn them into something that is an amazing attribute or asset. And there are those people who somehow skate through life and just don't experience that realm.
Yeah. Leela says, Pluto is all about awareness. If you make needed changes proactively, Pluto will not be a big problem. He destroys things that one ignores.
Yeah.
Stephanie says expansion, destruction, and rebuilding. Yeah. I mean, lots of Pluto love in the chat, which is great. So it sounds like a lot of you are, you've either worked with it in your own life and you've found the gifts and the buried treasure in there. And in that process of transformation has been rewarding for you.
Sure. Allie Parks, wrote, who's actually in my apprentice program, wrote, "That's my whole life. I was born with Pluto square my nodes."
Mm.
So, there's, it's like it's not one size fits all.
Right.
Yeah. Lisa wrote, "Refined in the fire." It's more than just refined, though. It's energized for the process. There are species of pine trees that the pine cones can't produce seeds that grow unless they've been burned.
Yeah.
And so this is, it's part of nature's way of ensuring that full transformation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Rick, thank you. I feel like we have a full picture of January. We're beginning some things new, but they're carried on with the old story. We have some new perspective or lens that we're looking at these things through. And we're having an opportunity to really get underneath them and understand where they're coming from and what the lessons are and what we're needing to actually do with these stories in our life. And it might be a little quieter because we are not having as many aspects. So there may be like a feeling of, okay, because I could take a breath. And you talked about the nodes switching to Taurus and Scorpio, which may be grounding us a little bit. So more practical with our feet on the ground, you said. And this is going to be a month of making the unseen knowable, bringing things out into the open. And we talked about 2022 and the theme being not so fast.
Not so fast.
Yeah.
But we'll get there wherever there is, and it's like the Jews in the Bible wandering around in the desert until it's time for them to go to what's next. But just to drop a bomb at the end of it, what's next is not what's pleasing to a lot of people, because we look at and we've talked about this thing here before about technology, posthumanism, transhumanism, the idea of the computer becoming the brain, the whole artificial reality, virtual reality. There's a lot of people who are absolutely convinced that this should not be the future of the human race. But in perspective, there were probably people who were resistant to cooking meat over the fires when Prometheus gave us the fire, and the use of fire, and also people who would not, use electric bulbs or gas lights because there was something unnatural about it. I'm not advertising for that. I'm just saying that although we are wanting to be done with something that's now to get to something that's in the future, we may not be as interested in getting into the future as we think.
It's a really important point to make. And we're not going to go down the transhumanism path today.
No, not today.
But that's
we've been there.
It's kind of like careful what you wish for. Or my dad used to always say, the devil you know is sometimes better than the devil you don't know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, I mean, do you think there is also an equal and opposite move towards more simplicity, more nature, more like people actually more local, like communities? I mean, as things are shifting in that direction, there's kind of like also
absolutely. And I would throw out here the image or the book by Jules Verne, The Time Machine. I don't know. I mean, it was made into a movie. The book was a tremendous book. I'm thinking it was probably written back in the 1920s, maybe off by a decade here. And in the book and movie, The Time Machine, this inventor goes into a future where there's actually two races of humans.
Oh.
And they're the Eloi and the someone will type it in the chat box. I can't think of the Eloi live on the surface, and they're like 1968 flower children, hippies eating grapes naked, making love, living simplistically. Everything is lovely. Morlocks. The Morlocks are so there's the Eli, who are the simplistic humans living on the surface, and the Morlocks live underground, and they run the machinery of the planet that keeps the surface going. But in a way, it's like an extension of the split that we've already seen. Now, is that something that we're moving toward? Don't know, but it's an interesting book and or movie that really does say exactly. It's basically half the race stays innocent, simple, and is in what we might call a utopia, and the other half of the race, huh?
It sounds so nice there.
That's and then the other half of the other half is, and it turns out that I think they keep the upstairs going so wonderful and beautifully because I think they capture one occasionally and use them for food or something.
Oh God. Okay. Wow.
The Time Machine, Jules Verne.
Time Machine. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It's been so nice to be back together again. We are starting the Cosmic Connection up again every other week. So we'll be here generally on our normal Cosmic Connection time, which is Thursdays. But today we wanted to make sure we got the January forecast in for you before it got too late in the month. And so we'll be together every other week. We'll put that schedule up on the podcast page. So you can go to astrologyhub.com/podcasts and then look for Cosmic Connection, and you'll be able to see our schedule moving forward, which we don't have up yet, but we'll have it up soon. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the weekly weather is going to be back starting on Monday with Christopher Renstrom. We're going to have a blend of some of your favorites that you know and love with some new, and then also some new astrologers that you haven't met yet. So we'll be introducing you to both. And then if you're interested, we do have the 3-month astrology guide, the Astro Guide, which is available for you. You can go to astrologyhub.com/astro guide and get your personalized 3 months of transits ahead, plus with some guidance on how to work with those transits. And again, that's astrologyhub.com/astro guide. Rick, is there anything that you want to tell them about?
Yes. Thank you to Daniel Fenge. I hope I pronounced your name close. He put in the chat box, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells is really old, 1895. So as I said, I might be off a decade. I was off a few decades. But it doesn't take anything away from the awesomeness of that book or any of his other books.
Okay. Amazing. All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for being here. Rick, thank you for taking us on this cosmic journey through January with some little sneak peeks into the rest of the year. And thanks all of you for being here, for being a part of our community. And as always, for making astrology a part of your life. We'll catch you on the next episode. Take care, everybody.